What separates a fierce competitor from a legitimate villain in the National Football League? Where's the line between playing with an edge and crossing into territory that makes you a genuine menace to everyone around you? Today, we're diving deep into the darkest corners of NFL history to rank the league's most villainous players across 7 distinct levels, starting with players who are all bark and no bite, and ending with some of the most despicable human beings to ever put on a uniform. This isn't just about hard hits or trash talk. We're talking about players who changed rules, ended careers, destroyed lives, and in some cases committed actual crimes that landed them behind bars. By the time we reach level 7, you'll understand that some of these so-called villains weren't just bad at football ethics, they were bad at being decent human beings. So buckle up, because we're about to take a journey through intimidation, violence, criminal behavior, and yes, even a little bit of that championship excellence that makes everyone hate you. Let's break down all 7 levels and see where your most hated players land on this scale of villainy. Level 1 is where we start with the fake demons, the players who run their mouths constantly but never really back it up with anything substantial. These are the guys who get into shoving matches, rack up stupid penalties, and make themselves the center of attention without actually being dangerous or particularly effective. They're annoying, sure, but they're not scary. They're the NFL equivalent of a Chihuahua barking at a Rottweiler, all noise with zero actual threat behind it. And nobody exemplifies this category better than George Pickens of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Pickens has built quite the reputation for running his mouth and getting into meaningless scuffles that accomplish absolutely nothing for his team. Remember that Hail Mary situation against the Browns, where instead of actually going up for the ball and trying to make a play, Pickens was too busy wrestling with cornerback Greg Newsome behind the end zone? Newsome called him out afterwards, basically saying Pickens is a fake tough guy who talks big but doesn't actually do anything when it matters. That's the perfect summary of a fake demon right there. What makes Pickens so frustrating is that he actually has legitimate talent as a receiver, but he wastes so much energy on nonsense that doesn't help his team win games. After losing to Cleveland in the snow, Pickens literally blamed the weather conditions, as if the Browns players weren't also playing in the exact same snow on the exact same field. He's been fined multiple times for pulling players down by their face masks and starting pointless fights instead of focusing on making catches and gaining yards. All the antics in the world don't mean anything if you're not backing it up with production, and Pickens consistently lets his emotions get the better of him in ways that hurt his team rather than help. That's the definition of a fake demon, someone who wants all the attention that comes with being a villain without actually being willing or able to follow through on the threats. Mac Jones fits perfectly into this category as well, though his version of fake demon behavior leans more toward cheap shots that he tries to pretend didn't happen. Jones developed quite the reputation during his time with the Patriots for hits and actions that crossed the line, but that he would always deflect responsibility for afterwards. The incident where he kicked Bears safety Jaquan Brisker directly in the groin during a slide looked almost identical to Tom Brady's infamous kick on Ed Reed years earlier, except Brady was a champion, and Jones was getting benched for Bailey Zappi. Then, there was the situation with former Jets defensive back Sauce Gardner, who publicly accused Jones of delivering a low blow during a quarterback sneak pile. When confronted about it, Jones gave some ridiculous excuse about just saying good job to the defense, as if anyone believed that nonsense. Lions defensive coordinator claimed Jones was disrespectful with his trash talk in ways that went beyond normal competitive banter, suggesting there's something genuinely unlikable about how Jones carries himself. The difference between Jones and a real villain is that real villains own their behavior, while Jones acts like a coward who delivers cheap shots and then hides behind excuses. It's worth noting that since joining the 49ers, Jones has seemingly settled down and hasn't been involved in any major incidents, but his reputation from his Patriots days definitely earns him a spot in the fake demon category. Rounding out level 1 is Juju Smith-Schuster, who built his early career reputation on TikTok dancing and trash talking, but found out the hard way what happens when someone actually decides to throw hands. Juju called out the Eagles on Valentine's Day right after the Super Bowl, acting like he was this fearless competitor who wasn't afraid of anyone. During the Chiefs-Lions game, he threw a blindside block on Brian Branch that started their ongoing beef, thinking he could push people around without consequences. But when Branch finally had enough and threw a punch at the end of the game, Juju got absolutely destroyed. Photos from after that altercation showed Juju with a bloodied nose looking completely defeated, proving that all the dancing and talking in the world can't save you when someone actually decides to fight back. Colts linebacker Zaire Franklin perfectly summarized how players around the league feel about Juju, essentially saying he had been begging for someone to check him for a long time. The fake demon label fits perfectly for players like Juju who want to project this tough guy image, but aren't really built for the consequences that come with it. Moving up to level 2, we encounter the legitimate crash-outs, players who genuinely see red and destroy everything in their path, regardless of consequences, or who might get hurt. These aren't calculated cheap shot artists or players trying to gain a competitive advantage through intimidation. These are guys who lose control of their emotions and lash out violently, often hurting their own teams in the process through penalties and ejections. DK Metcalf of the Seattle Seahawks is the perfect example of a legitimate crash-out whose anger issues consistently put his team in terrible positions. His most infamous incident came against Fred Warner of the 49ers, when after Warner intercepted a pass and casually flipped the ball to a teammate, Metcalf absolutely lost his mind. He suplexed Warner to the turf, then grabbed 2 fistfuls of his face mask when Warner retaliated, earning an ejection and a $19,000 fine. Metcalf claimed he was just responding to Warner hitting him first, as if that somehow justified his completely disproportionate reaction. But that Warner incident wasn't even close to being isolated. NFL Network cameras caught Metcalf during a training camp practice ripping off a teammate's helmet and actually swinging it as a weapon during a fight. Think about how insane that is for a moment. This wasn't an opponent or someone from another team. This was his own teammate during practice, and Metcalf was so out of control that he weaponized a helmet. Against the Bears, he headbutted Tyreek Stevenson after some back-and-forth shoving, earning yet another unnecessary roughness penalty that hurt his team. In the year 2023 alone, Metcalf was fined 5 separate times, totaling over $75,000 for various infractions, including unnecessary roughness, unsportsmanlike conduct, and blindside blocks. The pattern is clear. Metcalf doesn't just talk, he acts violently without thinking about the consequences for himself or his team. That's what separates a crash-out from a fake demon. The crash-out actually follows through on the violence, even when it's completely counterproductive. Cortland Finnegan built his entire career around being an agitating presence who got under the skin of star receivers, using annoying antics and constant trash talk to draw penalties and get opponents ejected. For years, Finnegan made a living off this approach, perfecting the art of being just irritating enough to make other players lose their cool. But his trash-talking ways eventually ran into someone who wasn't interested in playing games. Andre Johnson was known as one of the quietest, most professional receivers in the league, someone who just wanted to play football without drama. But after years of dealing with Finnegan's harassment every time the Titans played the Texans, Johnson finally snapped in spectacular fashion. What followed was an absolute beatdown where Johnson grabbed Finnegan and repeatedly punched him in the head while Finnegan was basically helpless. Both players got ejected and fined $25,000, but only one walked away with his reputation intact. Finnegan learned the hard way that you can't constantly poke the bear and expect nothing to happen eventually. Brian Branch of the Detroit Lions is a young player who's already racked up a resume that puts him firmly in crash-out territory. Branch has been fined over $100,000 in just his first 3 NFL seasons, accumulating more than a dozen penalties for aggressive behavior, including flipping off fans after getting ejected from a game. His defining moment came in the matchup against the Kansas City Chiefs when he delivered such a vicious hit on Juju Smith-Schuster that photos showed Juju with a bloodied nose looking completely defeated. That hit was so brutal that Branch got suspended for a full game, and even after appealing the suspension, the league upheld it because the evidence was so clear. Branch tried to claim it was just football, but there's a difference between playing physical and intentionally trying to hurt someone, and Branch clearly crossed that line. The scary thing about Branch is he's still so young and already has this kind of reputation. If he doesn't figure out how to channel his aggression in more productive ways, he's going to spend his entire career giving away free yards and suspensions to the other team. The dynamic duo of Marshawn Lattimore and Mike Evans deserves special mention in the crash-out category because their beef transcends normal player rivalries. Every time the Saints and Buccaneers played each other twice a year, it was appointment television because you knew Lattimore and Evans were going to get into it. Neither player would I categorize as genuinely vicious or having intent to seriously hurt anyone except each other. Their mutual hatred produced some of the most entertaining fights and altercations in recent NFL history. Punches thrown, trash talk at maximum volume, both players getting ejected multiple times over the years. It was pure cinema every single time, the kind of rivalry that reminded people why division games matter so much. The fact that their beef was so consistent and so intense earns them both a spot on this list, even if they weren't out there trying to end careers. Chauncey Gardner-Johnson represents another flavor of crash out, the guy who's so difficult to deal with that he's been on multiple teams despite being genuinely talented. Gardner-Johnson has called out teammates publicly, gotten into fights with his own players, and developed a reputation as a headhunter who takes unnecessary risks to deliver big hits. His behavior on and off the field has made him a journeyman despite having the skills to be a long-term starter somewhere. The difference between Gardner-Johnson and some of the more malicious players on this list is that he's not purposefully trying to injure people or end careers. He's just reckless and emotional in ways that consistently create problems for whatever organization employs him. That recklessness combined with legitimate talent makes him frustrating for coaches and teammates who wish he would just focus on football instead of all the extra drama. Derwin James rounds out level 2 with his pattern of dangerous hits that consistently push and cross the line of what's acceptable. James has been fined over $127,000 throughout his career for repeated helmet-to-helmet contact and hits on defenseless players. He's racked up 7 unnecessary roughness penalties since 2018, tied for second most in the NFL, despite playing fewer games than anyone else on that list due to injuries. His hit on Travis Etienne that resulted in a helmet-to-helmet collision earned him a 1-game suspension. James was also fined over $17,000 for a leg whip tackle on Raiders running back Zamir White just this past season. The pattern suggests that when James sees a target, he destroys it regardless of safety rules or whether the play is already over. He's not calculating or malicious in the way some true villains are, but his recklessness makes him dangerous to everyone on the field. Level 3 brings us to possible villains, players who are right on the borderline between being reckless crash-outs and legitimate villains who deserve universal condemnation. These are guys who've had multiple dirty incidents creating a pattern, but they haven't quite crossed over into territory where everyone agrees they're irredeemable. Azeez Al-Shaair sits perfectly in this possible villain category. His most notorious incident was the absolutely brutal hit on Trevor Lawrence that left the Jaguars quarterback displaying the fencing response, a clear sign of serious neurological trauma. Al-Shaair hit Lawrence in the head after he was already sliding, sparking a massive brawl on the field. He was ejected and later suspended for multiple games, but that wasn't an isolated incident. Earlier that same season, he punched Bears running back Roshan Johnson on the sideline for seemingly no reason and delivered a questionable hit on Caleb Williams. He was fined over $11,000 for the punch. What makes Al-Shaair a possible villain, rather than a confirmed villain, is that there's still some debate about intent versus recklessness. Some defenders argue that the game happens so fast and quarterbacks sliding at the last second makes it impossible for defenders to avoid contact. But when you look at the pattern of behavior, when you see multiple incidents across multiple games against multiple opponents, it becomes harder to give him the benefit of the doubt. That playoff hit on Justin Herbert that went uncalled despite being clearly late and dangerous showed that Alshire either can't or won't adjust his approach to stay within the rules. One more major incident and he crosses over into full villain territory without question. Frankie Louvu is building a similar pattern that's concerning for anyone who cares about player safety. Louvu has been fined multiple times for hip drop tackles, including incidents against the Falcons, Chiefs, and most recently, the Seahawks, Jackson Smith-Njigba, which earned him a whopping $100,000 fine and initially a one-game suspension that was later overturned on appeal. His most controversial moment came in the playoff win against the Lions when he delivered an unflagged helmet-to-helmet hit on Jared Goff that led directly to a pick-six. That play gave Washington a crucial 24-14 lead in their upset victory, meaning Louvu's dirty hit directly impacted the outcome of a playoff game. Despite all the fines and criticism, Louvu refuses to change his approach. He's gone on record claiming he doesn't even understand what constitutes a hip drop tackle, which is either a blatant lie or suggests he's dangerously clueless about rules designed to protect players from serious injuries. The pattern suggests this is who Louvu is as a player, and more incidents seem inevitable. Dre Greenlaw keeps finding himself in controversial situations that push the limits of acceptable behavior. He was caught on camera appearing to purposely knee a Vikings player while they were down on the ground, an action that serves literally no football purpose and exists only to cause pain. He's been fined for shoving Cardinals tight end Trey McBride during a sideline scuffle. His most notable villain moment came against the Eagles when he got into an altercation with Philadelphia's head of security, a man known as Big Dom. Greenlaw reached over during a scuffle and made contact with Big Dom's face with a closed fist, behavior that got him ejected from the game. Most recently, Greenlaw was suspended for a game for an incident with an official after a game ended, showing that his confrontational behavior extends beyond just players to include referees and team personnel. He's right on the edge of crossing over into full-time villain territory, and it feels like only a matter of time before another incident pushes him over that line. Kiko Alonso rounds out level 3 with a disturbing pattern of targeting sliding quarterbacks, which is about as dirty as it gets in modern football. Everyone knows that once a quarterback slides, they're giving themselves up and defenders are supposed to avoid contact. It's one of the most fundamental rules designed to protect the most important players on the field. Alonso either didn't care or couldn't control himself. His most infamous incident was the brutal hit on Joe Flacco in 2017. After Flacco slid feet first, Alonso delivered a vicious blow to his head that knocked off his helmet and left him with a concussion and a bloody cut ear. Ravens players were absolutely outraged, with Jeremy Maclin calling it a dirty play and Ronnie Stanley saying Alonso should have been ejected immediately. But that wasn't an isolated incident. Alonso has a documented history of dirty hits on quarterbacks throughout his career. He was fined for a hit on Ryan Fitzpatrick and was involved in the controversial play where Brian Hoyer tore his ACL after sliding. Right before his retirement, he was ejected for yet another late hit on a sliding Josh Allen, sparking another brawl. His repeated targeting of defenseless quarterbacks who had already given themselves up puts him right on the border of villain territory. Level 4 is where we get to actual confirmed villains, players whose behavior was so consistently dirty and dangerous that there's no debate about whether they crossed the line. Mike Mitchell fits this category perfectly. The former Steelers safety made a career out of headhunting and celebrating when he injured opponents. Mitchell had this absolutely disgusting habit of targeting players' heads with the crown of his helmet and then acting like he was just playing hard-nosed football. That hit on Tyler Eifert was sickening to watch. Mitchell used the crown of his helmet to deliver a concussion, then had the audacity to pose with his arms crossed like he'd just made the play of the year. He was celebrating causing a traumatic brain injury to another human being. Mitchell tried to concuss A.J. Green multiple times over the years, dove headfirst into victory formation just to spear players when the game was already over, and celebrated almost every single injury he caused. The man was a walking CTE machine who took genuine pride in hurting people, and the NFL letting him play for as long as he did is frankly embarrassing. Ryan Clark, another former Steelers safety, straight up admitted to intentionally trying to injure opponents during his playing career and showed zero remorse about it. His most notorious incident was the brutal shot he delivered to Wes Welker's chest on a tipped ball, propelling Welker backwards and leaving him flat on his back with his head hitting the turf. Welker didn't return to the game. Clark received an unnecessary roughness penalty for hitting a defenseless receiver and faced potential NFL disciplinary action, but nothing substantial came of it, and now he's talking on television like his past behavior doesn't matter. The fact that players like Clark and Mitchell can transition seamlessly into media careers where they're treated as football experts rather than being held accountable for deliberately trying to end careers tells you everything you need to know about how the NFL views player safety when it's not convenient for their public relations. Albert Haynesworth was a legitimate villain whose most infamous act shocked even a league that had seen plenty of dirty play over the decades. The 6'6", 320-pound defensive tackle was already known as a scary, intimidating player who used his immense size and surprising athleticism to dominate offensive linemen. But his reputation as a dirty player was cemented forever by one egregious act of violence. In 2006, after a play had ended and Cowboys offensive lineman Andre Gurode's helmet had come off, Haynesworth deliberately stomped on Gurode's face and then kicked him in the head. Gurode received multiple stitches above his forehead and beneath his eye. It was one of the most disgusting displays of unnecessary violence in NFL history, and Haynesworth was suspended 5 games, which at the time was one of the longest suspensions for an on-field incident. Even Haynesworth's own teammates called him out for being unnecessarily aggressive during practice, suggesting his violent tendencies weren't limited to game situations. Hines Ward represents an interesting case of villainy because he wasn't out there stomping on people's faces or deliberately trying to cause concussions with helmet-to-helmet hits. Instead, Ward made a career out of blindside crackback blocks that were so vicious and so consistently targeting defenseless players that the NFL literally had to create a rule named after him. The Hines Ward rule was implemented to protect defenders from the kind of blocks Ward specialized in, where he'd come from their blind side and absolutely destroy them when they had no chance to see him coming or protect themselves. What made Ward's play so infuriating to opponents and their fans was the smile. After every dirty hit, after every blindside block that left a defender crumpled on the ground, Ward would flash that big smile like he'd just had the time of his life. He took genuine pleasure in hurting people, and that combination of effective dirty play and visible enjoyment of causing pain earned him a well-deserved spot in villain territory. Aqib Talib was a legitimate villain who combined dirty play with complete disregard for consequences, or how his behavior reflected on his team. Talib's most notable incidents involved his bizarre obsession with ripping Michael Crabtree's gold chain off his neck. Not once, but twice in consecutive years during Broncos-Raiders games, Talib went after that chain, sparking massive brawls that got both players ejected and suspended for 2 games. But Talib's villain behavior went way beyond chain snatching. He openly admitted to intentionally grabbing Philly Brown's face mask during Super Bowl 50 because he was mad at the referees, showing his willingness to hurt opponents out of frustration when things weren't going his way. He got into a sideline scuffle with Titans receiver Harry Douglas, where he ripped off Douglas's helmet and basically dared the entire Titans team to fight him. Talib's combination of elite talent and consistently dirty play made him fascinating to watch, but absolutely infuriating if you were a fan of any team playing against him. Brandon Merriweather was a safety who made a career out of trying to give opponents brain damage, and that's not hyperbole or exaggeration. That hit on Eddie Lacy was absolutely sickening to watch. Merriweather used his head as a spear and knocked Lacy completely unconscious, forcing him out of the game. It wasn't just one bad play or one heated moment where emotions got the better of him. This was Merriweather's entire approach to playing safety. He hunted for opportunities to deliver concussions, and the fact that Packers running back James Starks felt compelled to come in and deliver payback shows just how much opposing players hated Merriweather's tactics. Players who deliberately target heads aren't playing football, they're committing assault. And the league's failure to ban players like Merriweather permanently is one of the biggest black marks on NFL history. Rodney Harrison rounds out level 4 as a player who was literally voted the dirtiest player in the NFL by his peers. When other NFL players, guys who understand the game and know the difference between hard play and dirty play, when they're calling you out as the dirtiest player in the league, that tells you everything you need to know. Harrison accumulated 18 unnecessary roughness penalties, 7 personal fouls, 4 roughing the passer penalties, and a total of 77 penalties throughout his career. He was suspended for a helmet-to-helmet hit on Jerry Rice in 2002, and that was something he was notorious for throughout his career. Late hits, helmet-to-helmet contact, hits that cost him thousands of dollars in fines, but never seemed to change his approach. Even opposing coaches like Jeff Fisher accused Harrison of laughing at injured players, suggesting his dirty play wasn't just about gaining a competitive advantage, but about actually enjoying hurting people. These level 4 villains were definitely terrible for the game, but they have nothing on what's coming next. Level 5 brings us to the menaces. Players whose behavior crossed over from dirty football into genuinely disturbing territory that extended beyond the field. Richie Incognito fits this category better than almost anyone because his villainy wasn't just about late hits or cheap shots during games. Incognito's most notorious incident was the systematic harassment and bullying of teammate Jonathan Martin while they were both with the Miami Dolphins. Incognito left threatening voicemails using racial slurs and sexually explicit language, called Martin horrific names, and threatened him and his family with violent acts. This wasn't trash talk or competitive banter. This was genuine harassment that created such a toxic environment that Martin eventually left the team. But this was just the latest incident in a career-long pattern of disturbing behavior. At Nebraska, Incognito was shuttled to anger management classes for constant blow-ups and fights. Oregon kicked him out of their program after just 1 week because he couldn't meet even basic behavioral conditions. His own teammates at multiple stops said his behavior crossed lines that had nothing to do with football. Incognito represents what happens when football culture enables truly toxic people.